Clara, the protagonist, was born into a family that valued appearances and wealth above all else. From a young age, she felt the sting of comparison, as her older siblings were praised for their beauty, charm, and outward accomplishments, while she was quietly overlooked. Clara had a gentle demeanor, soft brown eyes that reflected empathy, and a modest smile that rarely drew attention. Her family considered her plain and unremarkable, never recognizing the depth of her character or the kindness she naturally extended to everyone around her. Despite their harshness, Clara carried herself with quiet dignity, never allowing their disdain to embitter her heart. In the small town where Clara grew up, gossip traveled fast. The neighbors often whispered about her appearance, echoing her family's dismissive attitudes. Clara attended the local school, where she excelled in reading, helping her classmates, and tending to small acts of kindness. She often tutored younger children, assisted with chores, and offered comfort to those who were sad or lonely. Yet, these qualities, though rare and admirable, went unnoticed by those who measured worth solely by outward beauty. Clara's life was a series of small, unnoticed victories, moments of quiet courage, and tiny sparks of joy that she cultivated within herself. Her family's treatment of her was consistent, but subtle enough to leave her questioning her own value. While her siblings received gifts, encouragement, and attention, Clara was left to fend for herself. She was expected to work alongside her mother in household chores and help her father with menial labor, often receiving little gratitude. Her family's constant reminders that she was too plain and unlikely to secure a good marriage had become a bitter refrain in her mind. Yet Clara refused to let their judgments define her. She took solace in the small pleasures of life, the warmth of the sun on her face, the smell of freshly baked bread, the laughter of children in the street, and the quiet beauty of the countryside around her. Despite the emotional neglect, Clara possessed an inner strength that often went unnoticed. She had learned to observe the world with a careful eye, to read people, and to respond with empathy. Her mind was sharp, and her heart was generous. She spent hours reading books borrowed from the town's modest library, immersing herself in stories of courage, love, and justice. These stories nurtured a quiet hope in her, the belief that life could offer more than the narrow confines of her family's shallow worldview. Clara dreamed of a life where she could be valued for who she truly was, not simply for how she looked. The narrative of Part 1 establishes both Clara's vulnerability and her resilience. It paints a vivid picture of her modest upbringing, her family's superficial and cold nature, and the societal pressures that reinforce these attitudes. At the same time, it emphasizes Clara's inner beauty, her kindness, intelligence, and quiet strength, which sets the foundation for the story's central theme, that true worth lies within, and that genuine recognition and love will come from those who see beyond appearances. By the end of Part 1, readers understand why Clara feels isolated and undervalued. Yet they also sense her potential to rise above the circumstances imposed on her. This part is essential because it establishes empathy for Clara and sets the emotional stakes. Her family's shallow judgment contrasts sharply with the deeper appreciation she will eventually receive, creating anticipation for her journey and eventual triumph. Clara's humble beginning is not merely a tale of hardship, but a stage that highlights her latent qualities, which will later draw the attention of someone capable of seeing her true value, the rich rancher, who will change the course of her life forever. Clara's family, despite her quiet strength and unwavering kindness, saw her not as a daughter to be cherished, but as a commodity whose value was limited by society's narrow standards of beauty. Her father, a stern and calculating man, frequently reminded the family of their financial struggles, framing Clara's plainness as a liability that could be turned into profit. Her mother, though softer in demeanor, had been shaped by years of social expectation and also viewed Clara's plain looks as a source of shame. Together, they conspired to turn Clara's existence into a transaction, convincing themselves that they were acting pragmatically rather than cruelly. One evening, as Clara quietly mended clothing by the dim glow of an oil lamp, her family discussed their plan. The conversation was casual, almost businesslike, as though they were deciding the price of a cow or the worth of a plot of land. Her older siblings laughed lightly at the idea, mocking Clara's quiet nature and her hopeless chances of marrying someone of status or wealth. They believed that selling Clara to a local merchant or someone in need of a servant would solve multiple problems. It would remove the burden of her presence, provide immediate financial gain, and spare them the embarrassment of having a daughter deemed undesirable by society's standards. Clara, overhearing fragments of their discussion, felt a cold, sinking despair. The words struck her with the force of betrayal, not just because of the act itself, but because the people who were supposed to love her saw her as nothing more than an object. The next morning, Clara's life changed with brutal swiftness. Her family arranged for a traveling merchant to take her to a distant town where she would work as a laborer, ostensibly for her own good. They told her it was an opportunity, though their tone was dismissive and indifferent, leaving no room for objection. Clara's attempts to protest or plead were met with harsh reminders that her opinions did not matter, that her beauty or lack thereof dictated her future. Her heart ached with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and anger, but she quickly realized resistance was futile. Her family's greed and narrow-mindedness had cornered her into submission. As she was led away, Clara could not help but feel the weight of isolation pressing down on her. The journey ahead was unknown and intimidating. She would have to navigate life in a world that had already judged her unworthy. Despite the fear, Clara clung to her inner resilience. She reminded herself that her worth was not defined by her family's shallow perceptions. She thought of the small joys that had sustained her, her love for books, her ability to help others, her quiet strength, and silently vowed that she would survive this ordeal without surrendering her dignity. This part of the story emphasizes the stark contrast between Clara's intrinsic value and her family's mercenary mindset. While they saw her as too plain and disposable, the narrative allows readers to feel the injustice of their actions and understand the emotional stakes for Clara. It also establishes a critical turning point in her life, the moment when she is forced to leave the only home she has known, stepping into an uncertain future that will ultimately lead her to a person who recognizes her true worth. Part 2 is essential because it heightens the emotional tension and sets the stage for Clara's journey toward autonomy, self-discovery, and eventual love. It also foreshadows the story's central theme, that superficial judgments are shallow and temporary, while genuine recognition of character and heart endures. Clara's forced departure is not the end of her story. It is the beginning of a path that will reveal her hidden strength and bring her into the orbit of someone who will see her as priceless. Clara's journey to the ranch began before sunrise under a sky streaked with pink and gold. The merchant who had purchased her, a gruff man with little patience for sentiment, rode alongside her in a creaking wagon, rattling along the dirt roads that connected her family's village to the distant countryside. Clara clutched a small bundle of her belongings, few in number, but precious, a worn book she had hidden from her family, a locket containing a miniature sketch of the countryside she loved, and a handkerchief embroidered with her initials. These items represented the fragments of her identity that her family had never valued, but which she held tightly to. As reminders of her inner world and resilience, the landscape stretched endlessly around her fields, of amber wheat swaying gently in the wind, distant hills rising like silent sentinels, and the occasional scatter of cottages that marked other families' lives. For Clara, the scenery was both comforting and intimidating. On one hand, it reminded her of the simple beauty of life that she had always cherished despite her family's cruelty. On the other, it underscored her isolation as she realized she was leaving everything familiar behind. The path ahead was uncertain, and every mile increased the distance between her past and her future. During the journey, Clara reflected on her family's decision, trying to reconcile their cruelty with the values she had been taught to believe in. She wondered if perhaps she had misunderstood them or if there had been any way to change their minds. But deep down, she knew that their judgment had little to do with her character and everything to do with their obsession with appearances and wealth. This realization, though painful, strengthened her resolve. Clara understood that her worth was not determined by her family's narrow standards, and she began to cultivate a quiet sense of hope that something better might await her beyond the horizon. The merchant, noticing her quiet contemplation, occasionally spoke, though his words were blunt and lacking warmth. He was a practical man, focused on the transaction and the journey itself, with little regard for Clara's emotional state. Yet even in his terse comments, Clara caught glimpses of the wider world beyond her village stories of prosperous ranches, towns with bustling markets, and families living lives of opportunity. She imagined what life might be like if she were judged not by her looks, but by her abilities and her heart. Each vision strengthened her courage, even as her heart ached for the family who had betrayed her. Along the way, Clara encountered moments that tested both her patience and her optimism. A sudden rainstorm soaked the wagon, leaving her shivering. Yet she found solace in small acts of endurance, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, keeping her eyes on the distant horizon, and speaking softly to herself, reminding herself that she was capable of facing hardships with grace. At night, as the wagon stopped at small inns or way stations, Clara observed the lives of strangers, noting acts of kindness and cruelty alike. These observations reinforced her belief in the duality of the world, that while some people could be shallow and selfish, others possessed a quiet nobility that might someday recognize her true worth. The journey, which lasted several days, became more than a physical passage. It was a symbolic transition from a life defined by her family's judgment to a world in which her own resilience and character could emerge. By the time the ranch came into view, a sprawling estate with fences that marked its boundaries, stables filled with horses, and fields stretching beyond the eye could see, Clara felt a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the pain of rejection but carrying with her the hope that her life could take a turn toward something extraordinary. It is crucial because it bridges Clara's past of oppression and neglect with a new chapter of opportunity that awaits her. It emphasizes her inner strength, her ability to reflect and grow, and the beginning of a journey both literal and emotional that will eventually lead her to the rancher who will see her true value. The journey itself becomes a metaphor for Clara's resilience, courage, and readiness to embrace a life that acknowledges her worth beyond appearances. Clara's first view of the ranch was breathtaking in a way that left her momentarily speechless. From the crest of a gentle hill, she could see sprawling pastures dotted with grazing cattle, neat rows of crops stretching toward the horizon, and sturdy buildings that spoke of prosperity and careful management. The ranch was alive with movement, the rhythmic clatter of hooves, the lowing of cows, and the calls of ranch hands coordinating tasks. For Clara, who had spent her life in a modest, overlooked household, The sheer scale and order of the ranch were both intimidating and mesmerizing as she descended the hill, her wagon creaking under the weight of her small bundle of belongings. Clara's thoughts were a mixture of anxiety and hope. She wondered what awaited her inside the ranch's main house and whether the wealthy owner would see her as merely another laborer or notice the quiet dignity she carried despite her plain appearance. She had been conditioned to expect judgment, neglect, and the harshness of those who valued appearances above all else, yet a tiny flicker of optimism began to grow. Perhaps here, in this expansive and seemingly fair place, her worth would be measured differently. The first encounter with Elias, the ranch owner, was nothing like Clara had imagined. He was a tall man with an air of quiet authority, yet his presence was not intimidating in a cruel way. It was grounded, deliberate, and observant. His eyes, sharp and discerning, did not linger on Clara's outward appearance but seemed to register the subtle details of her posture, the way she held herself despite the fear in her eyes and the calm steadiness in her expression. While her family had overlooked her because of society's superficial standards, Elias appeared to be seeing something far deeper. There was a spark of curiosity in his gaze, a recognition that Clara possessed qualities that were rare and valuable. Clara, naturally cautious, tried to shrink into herself, unsure if her composure would withstand scrutiny. The merchant announced her arrival and departed, leaving her alone with Elias. There was a brief silence as the two regarded each other, a quiet tension filled with the unspoken assessments each was making. Clara noticed that Elias did not immediately speak of her family's deal or comment on her looks. Instead, he asked practical questions about her skills, experience with work, and her health, questions that seemed to treat her as a capable individual rather than as property. His tone was calm and measured, yet underneath it lay an awareness that she was more than the circumstances of her arrival. This moment established the first seeds of a connection that would grow throughout the story. Clara, who had been conditioned to expect disdain and indifference, found herself met with something unfamiliar, genuine attention and subtle respect. Although she did not yet fully trust him, there was an undeniable shift within her, an inkling that perhaps this was a place where she could prove her worth and be valued for who she truly was. Elias, for his part, was quietly intrigued. He had encountered many people at his ranch over the years, workers, merchants, and visitors, but Clara stood out. There was a sincerity in her eyes, a gentleness that hinted at strength, and a humility. Clara's first days on the ranch were both exhausting and enlightening. The sprawling property demanded constant attention. Horses needed to be fed and groomed. Fences required repair, crops had to be tended, and the myriad tasks of ranch life moved with a rhythm that was foreign to her. Clara had grown up performing chores at home, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of the work. She quickly realized that physical endurance alone would not be enough. She would need patience, resourcefulness, and quick thinking to navigate her new environment successfully. The ranch hands were a rough, practical group used to hard work and unflinching standards. Initially, they were wary of Clara. Some dismissed her as inexperienced, assuming that her plain appearance reflected weakness or a lack of capability. Others were quietly curious, noting the subtle grace with which she moved, the attentive way she observed her surroundings, and the careful consideration she gave to each task. Clara, for her part, was determined to prove herself without drawing undue attention. She approached every chore with meticulous care, learning from mistakes and absorbing advice with humility. Her willingness to work diligently and her ability to think critically gradually earned the respect of those around her. At the same time, Clara faced internal challenges. She wrestled with self-doubt shaped by years of being undervalued by her family. Each task she undertook, whether successfully or with difficulty, became a test of her confidence. She reminded herself of the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years, the resilience that had helped her endure rejection, the kindness that had guided her interactions with others, and the intelligence that allowed her to adapt to new situations. Slowly, she began to recognize that the ranch offered her something she had never experienced at home, a chance to be seen and appreciated for her abilities, rather than her appearance. Elias observed Clara carefully during this period. Though he did not interfere unnecessarily, he noted how she approached work with integrity, how she treated the ranch hands with respect, and how she remained calm under pressure. Small gestures, a steadying hand when a horse grew restless, a quick solution to a logistical problem, a willingness to learn rather than complain caught his attention. To him, Clara's qualities were rare and valuable, and he began to view her as more than a newcomer to the ranch. She represented a spirit of intelligence, diligence, and quiet courage that resonated deeply with him. As Clara settled into her routine, she also began forming subtle bonds with the ranch hands. While initially skeptical of her, many came to appreciate her thoughtfulness, her ability to anticipate problems, and her willingness to contribute without seeking praise. These relationships became a source of support for Clara, offering encouragement, friendship, and practical guidance. She discovered that even in a world that could be harsh and demanding, trust and respect could be earned through consistent effort and authenticity. Part of Clara's adjustment involved navigating her own emotions. She felt a mixture of pride, fear, and curiosity as she tackled each new challenge. She was proud of herself for adapting, afraid of failing in a place where the stakes were higher than she had ever faced, and curious about the man who seemed to value her in ways her family never had. These emotions were complex and sometimes conflicting, yet they were necessary for her growth. Clara began to understand that resilience was not merely enduring hardship, it was embracing challenges and allowing oneself to evolve in the process. By the end of this stage, Clara had transformed from a timid, undervalued girl into a capable, resourceful young woman. Her presence on the ranch was no longer merely tolerated. It was acknowledged and respected. This part of the story emphasizes the importance of action over appearances and lays the groundwork for the evolving relationship between Clara and Elias. Her adjustment to ranch life symbolizes not just physical adaptation but emotional and social growth, reinforcing the story's central theme. True worth is revealed through character, diligence, and integrity. As days turned into weeks on the ranch, Clara's presence began to weave itself into the rhythm of daily life. Her diligence and thoughtfulness had already earned her the quiet respect of the ranch hands, but it was her interactions with Elias that would mark the beginning of a deeper, more meaningful connection. Their relationship did not spark instantly. It unfolded gradually, shaped by small gestures, shared experiences, and the subtle recognition of qualities in one another that few others noticed. The first signs of connection were understated. Elias observed Clara not just as a worker on his ranch, but as a person of integrity and intelligence. He noticed the careful way she handled the horses, the precision with which she completed her tasks, and the kindness she extended even to the youngest and lowest-ranking workers. These observations sparked a quiet admiration in him. For the first time in a long while, he encountered someone whose worth was not superficial but rooted in character. Clara, in turn, found herself aware of his presence, not in a fearful or servile way, as she had been conditioned to be around authority figures, but with curiosity and a cautious openness. She recognized in Elias a fairness and perception that contrasted sharply with the judgmental eyes of her family. Their interactions were often subtle, a shared task that required teamwork, a brief conversation about the livestock or crops, or a moment of casual guidance in which Elias offered practical advice rather than criticism. Clara found herself appreciating the way he listened, not just to her words but to the thoughtfulness behind them. Unlike her family, Elias did not dismiss her ideas. Instead, he considered them, weighed their merit, and occasionally acted upon them. These moments, small as they might seem to an outsider, built a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Clara began to see him not just as a wealthy rancher who could dictate her life, but as a man who valued intelligence, kindness, and quiet strength, qualities she herself had cultivated in the face of neglect and disdain. Beyond work, their connection deepened through conversation. In the evenings, while the ranch settled into calm, they occasionally spoke of topics beyond labor, the land and its history, their childhood experiences, and small dreams for the future. Clara shared her love of reading and the books that had sustained her, and Elias spoke of the responsibilities and burdens of managing the ranch. These exchanges revealed layers of personality that each had kept hidden from the world: Clara's empathy, resilience, and reflective nature, and Elias's sense of fairness, his appreciation for subtlety, and a rare capacity to value people for who they truly were. Every conversation, no matter how brief, nurtured the bond between them. Clara also noticed small gestures that spoke volumes. Elias would occasionally check in on her well-being after a long day of work, offer guidance without condescension, or show appreciation for her careful attention to tasks. These gestures were not ostentatious but carried weight precisely because of their sincerity. In a world where Clara had been undervalued and dismissed for her plainness, these acts of acknowledgement were transformative. They reinforced her self-worth, showing her that someone could see and appreciate her true character. For Elias, Clara's growth on the ranch was a revelation. Her competence and perseverance were evident, but it was her quiet courage and unassuming kindness that captivated him. He found himself drawn to her in a way that transcended mere physical appearance. He valued the qualities her family had overlooked, and each day revealed more reasons for admiration and subtle affection. By the end of this part, the growing connection between Clara and Elias is palpable. It is built not on superficial attraction but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the recognition of inner qualities. Part 6 is crucial because it lays the emotional groundwork for the romantic and personal development that will follow. Clara begins to understand that she can trust Elias, and Elias realizes that he has discovered someone truly remarkable. Their connection becomes a lens through which the story explores the central theme, that genuine love and respect are rooted in character, not appearance. Just as Clara was beginning to feel a sense of belonging and purpose on the ranch, news came that her family had learned of her whereabouts. Her arrival at the prosperous estate and the attention she had earned did not escape the grapevine of the surrounding communities. Her family, motivated by greed and perhaps a lingering sense of pride, saw an opportunity to profit or regain control over the daughter they had once dismissed. Their return introduced a new tension into Clara's life, forcing her to confront the people who had once betrayed her and to assert her independence for the first time. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a letter delivered by a nervous messenger. Clara read it in the quiet of her small quarters on the ranch. Her father's words were thinly veiled demands, instructing her to return home or face consequences, and her mother's tone carried guilt masked by expectation. They reminded her of the duties she owed them and implied that her newfound position with Elias was temporary or unearned. Clara's initial reaction was a mixture of anger, disbelief, and fear. The family who had sold her as if she were an object now demanded obedience, assuming that she would submit without question. Elias, ever observant, noticed Clara's distress and offered his support. Unlike her family, He did not pressure her to respond in any particular way. He simply listened, provided reassurance, and helped her weigh her options. This support underscored the contrast between her past and present circumstances. Where her family had tried to manipulate and control her, Elias empowered her to make her own decisions. Clara realized that her value did not depend on her family's approval, but on her own judgment and the respect she had earned through her diligence, courage, and integrity. When her family arrived in person, the confrontation was tense. Her father's eyes were calculating, her mother's demeanor fragile yet insistent, and her siblings were smug, convinced that Clara's new position could be turned into a source of wealth for them. They tried to belittle her accomplishments, reminding her of her plainness and their previous assessment that she was unworthy of recognition. They underestimated the transformation Clara had undergone during her time on the ranch. Her confidence, honed through weeks of hard work and the steady affirmation from Elias, was now evident. She no longer flinched under their judgment. Instead, she faced them with calm authority, her voice steady and her gaze unwavering. Clara made it clear that she was no longer a passive participant in her own life. She rejected their attempts to control her, stating firmly that she would remain at the ranch and continue contributing to a place where she was valued. Her family's shock was palpable. They had never encountered this side of Clara before. For them, the girl they had dismissed as too plain had transformed into a woman of independence, self-respect, and strength. Their anger and disappointment only highlighted the contrast between their shallow values and the depth of Clara's character. This confrontation also highlighted the growth of Elias's feelings and his protective nature. He remained by Clara's side, reinforcing her autonomy without dominating the situation. His presence was a silent assertion that Clara was no longer alone in the world, and that anyone who sought to undermine her would have to contend with the strength of her newfound position and his recognition of her worth. Part 7 is essential because it introduces external conflict that tests Clara's independence and self-confidence. It forces her to assert her value in a direct confrontation with the family that had once betrayed her. At the same time, it deepens the emotional connection between Clara and Elias, demonstrating that true love and respect involve support, empowerment, and recognition of character. By the end of this section, Clara has fully embraced her autonomy and proven that she will no longer be judged or controlled by superficial standards. Her family's return, intended to intimidate or manipulate, ultimately serves to highlight the transformation that has taken place within her, a transformation that will guide the story toward its climax and the full recognition of her worth. Life on the ranch, though challenging, had become routine for Clara. She had grown confident in her abilities, respected by the ranch hands, and increasingly recognized by Elias for her intelligence, kindness, and resilience. However, her transformation was about to face a true test, a moment that would define not only her role on the ranch, but also the depth of her character and the bond she shared with Elias. This was the turning point, where action and courage would replace reflection and growth. The crisis arrived in the form of a severe storm. Dark clouds rolled over the ranch in the late afternoon, winds howling through the fields, whipping the crops into disarray and sending loose equipment tumbling across the yard. Cattle became agitated, horses panicked in their stalls, and small structures risked being damaged by falling branches. Elias, despite his experience, recognized the potential danger. Without quick, decisive action, the livestock could be lost and injuries could occur. The storm was intense, threatening everything the ranch had worked so hard to maintain, and the human lives on the property were equally at risk. Clara's response was immediate. While others hesitated, unsure of how to prioritize tasks amidst the chaos, she assessed the situation with clarity. She coordinated the ranch hands, assigning them to secure the animals, reinforce the fences, and stabilize equipment. Her calm and authoritative presence inspired confidence in those around her. Even when rain and wind battered her, she continued to move from task to task, offering guidance, encouragement, and practical solutions. Her innate ability to stay composed under pressure, which had previously been noticed quietly by Elias, became visible to everyone in the ranch yard. During the height of the storm, a critical moment occurred. A frightened horse broke free from its stall and ran toward the fence, where a gaping section risked both the animal and the nearby cattle. Clara did not hesitate. She moved with deliberate speed, speaking softly to the horse to calm it while guiding it away from danger. Her courage and quick thinking prevented a potentially disastrous chain reaction. Elias watched from a distance, realizing that Clara was not only capable of managing the ranch in ordinary circumstances but could also rise to meet extraordinary challenges. This moment crystallized his admiration into a deeper, heartfelt recognition of her strength and resilience. Once the storm passed, the damage to the ranch was assessed. Thanks to Clara's decisive actions, the losses were minimal and no one had been hurt. The ranch hands, who had initially doubted her, now looked at her with newfound respect and gratitude. Even Elias, who had long recognized her qualities, felt a surge of pride. This incident marked a significant shift. Clara was no longer just a competent worker or a promising presence. She had proven herself as someone whose intelligence, courage, and leadership could shape the ranch's survival. The turning point also carried an emotional dimension. After the storm, Elias approached Clara, acknowledging the decisive role she had played. He expressed admiration not just for her actions, but for her character, the courage, foresight, and composure that had guided her. For Clara, this recognition was transformative. It reinforced her sense of self-worth, showing her that true value was not defined by superficial judgment or past rejection, but by inner strength, empathy, and determination. Part 8 is pivotal because it solidifies Clara's evolution from a timid, undervalued girl into a capable, confident woman whose qualities are undeniable even to the most discerning observer. It also deepens the emotional bond between her and Elias, showing that his admiration and eventual love are grounded not in appearances, but in genuine respect and recognition of her character. The storm becomes a metaphor for the challenges she has faced in life. When confronted with adversity, Clara rises with courage, resilience, and integrity, qualities that will define her future happiness and the fulfillment of the story's central theme. That true worth shines brightest in moments of crisis. After the storm had passed and the ranch was stabilized, the relationship between Clara and Elias had shifted subtly but unmistakably. What had begun as quiet admiration and mutual respect had deepened into something more profound, a bond forged through shared experiences, challenges overcome, and the recognition of each other's true character. For Elias, the storm had been a revelation. Clara was not only competent and brave, but also someone whose inner qualities resonated with him on a level that transcended mere appearance. He found himself increasingly drawn to her presence, her calm intelligence, and the warmth she extended to everyone around her. The realization of his feelings was gradual. Elias noticed the small gestures Clara made, the way she encouraged the ranch hands without condescension, the patience she displayed in teaching new tasks, and the quiet moments when she offered him thoughtful insight or a comforting word. Her kindness was not performative. It was rooted in a deep empathy and understanding of the world, qualities that he had rarely encountered in others. Each day he felt a growing admiration that slowly transformed into affection, and finally, into love. Clara, too, became aware of a shift within herself. While she had long respected Elias for his fairness and perceptiveness, she now recognized an emotional depth in him that invited trust and intimacy. She felt seen, not as a plain girl judged by superficial standards, not as someone to be measured against societal expectations, but as a complete person, valued for her intelligence, courage, and heart. The awareness of being truly understood and appreciated was both exhilarating and comforting, and she found herself responding with openness, warmth, and a tentative hope that love might be possible. The declaration of love occurs organically, framed not as a grand gesture but as an honest, heartfelt expression of recognition and admiration. Elias chooses a quiet moment, away from the bustle of the ranch, perhaps in the golden light of the evening when the land is calm and the animals have settled. He tells Clara that from the moment he met her, he saw something remarkable, a combination of strength, intelligence, and integrity that few ever recognize. He expresses that he does not value her for outward beauty, which had been the standard by which her family measured her, but for the qualities that truly define a person. His words are deliberate and sincere, allowing Clara to hear not just the statement of love but the deep truth behind it, that she is valued completely. For who she is at her core, Clara's response is equally heartfelt. She acknowledges the journey she has undertaken from being undervalued and dismissed by her own family to proving herself on the ranch and earning the respect of those around her. She accepts Elias's love not as a relief from her past hardships, but as a recognition of the person she has always been, the qualities that have sustained her through adversity, and the courage she has cultivated. In this mutual acknowledgement, the story emphasizes a key theme, that genuine love arises from recognition, respect, and appreciation of character rather than superficial standards. The significance of this moment lies in its affirmation of Clara's worth. It is not merely a romantic milestone. It is the culmination of her personal growth, her resilience, and her journey toward self-empowerment. Her family's shallow judgments and attempts to control her life are rendered irrelevant in light of this authentic connection. Elias's love serves as both validation and affirmation, showing that the person who truly sees her value is someone who appreciates her inner qualities above all else. It is crucial because it marks the emotional climax of the story. Clara and Elias's recognition of love reflects not just romantic fulfillment, but the triumph of integrity, courage, and inner beauty over superficial judgment. It sets the stage for the story's resolution, in which Clara's life will be defined by genuine connection, respect, and the freedom to live as her true self, fully valued and cherished. With Elias's love openly declared and reciprocated, Clara stepped into a new chapter of her life, one defined not by judgment, rejection, or fear, but by respect, purpose, and authentic connection. The transition was not abrupt. It was a natural continuation of the growth she had experienced on the ranch. Over time, she fully embraced her role as both a vital part of the ranch and a partner to Elias, blending her diligence, compassion, and intelligence with a newfound confidence in her own worth. The first months of this new life were filled with the rhythms of ranch work, now undertaken with a sense of shared purpose and belonging. Clara and Elias coordinated tasks together, combining his experience with her insights, creating a partnership grounded in mutual respect and complementary strengths. Their bond extended beyond the practicalities of work into the quiet joys of daily life, shared meals after a long day, evening walks across the open fields, and moments of laughter and conversation that reflected their growing emotional intimacy. For Clara, these ordinary experiences were extraordinary because they were infused with recognition and appreciation, the very things she had been denied by her family. Clara's transformation was also deeply personal. She no longer carried the weight of her family's disdain. Instead of seeing herself through the lens of plainness, she recognized her inherent value, the courage, intelligence, kindness, and integrity that had guided her through hardship and won the respect of those who mattered most. Her confidence radiated in subtle ways. The way she gave instructions to ranch hands, the way she tended to the animals with calm authority, and the gentle way she nurtured relationships with everyone around her. She had become a woman who knew her worth and embraced it without arrogance or vanity. And her presence enriched the lives of those she touched. Her relationship with Elias continued to deepen, now marked by trust, partnership, and mutual admiration. Their love was rooted in the recognition of each other's true character, a love that would not fade with time or circumstance because it was built on the solid foundation of respect and understanding. Elias often reflected on how remarkable it was to find someone who shared his values, complemented his strengths, and challenged him to be better, not for superficial reasons, but for the shared vision of a life well lived. Clara's love, in turn, was enriched by the freedom to be fully herself, celebrated not for her appearance but for the person she had always been. Part of Clara's new life also involved redefining her relationship with her family. Though they had attempted to manipulate and reclaim her, she had set clear boundaries. She remained polite but firm, demonstrating that their judgment no longer held sway over her life. This resolution underscored the story's central theme. The opinions of those who fail to recognize true worth are inconsequential compared to the validation earned through courage, integrity, and genuine human connection. The story concludes with a sense of harmony and fulfillment. Clara and Elias stand together on the ranch, a life built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The ranch, once simply a place of labor and responsibility, becomes a home, a symbol of resilience, love, and personal triumph. Clara's journey from a plain and undervalued girl to a woman celebrated for her inner beauty and strength illustrates the timeless lesson that true worth is recognized not through superficial measures, but through the qualities that define a person's heart and character. It is essential because it delivers closure on every narrative thread. Clara's independence, her emotional growth, the vindication of her value, and the realization of love based on mutual respect. It leaves the reader with a satisfying sense of resolution,